Mike Tyson didn't fall because he forgot how to fight. At his peak, he was the most feared man on the planet. Unbeaten, unstoppable, untouchable. But the same fire that made him terrifying was slowly turning against him. One mistake didn't just cost him a fight, it nearly erased his entire legacy. And here's the part most people get wrong. Mike Tyson wasn't saved by boxing. He was saved by something far harder than punching. Discipline, control, and a voice he almost ignored. This isn't a story about championships. It's a story about what happens when power has no direction. And if you're not careful, it can happen to anyone. Stay with me, because what saved Mike Tyson might be the lesson you didn't know you needed. When the world treated him like something untouchable, Mike stepped off the path that had saved his life. And once he stepped off, everything started sliding. Before fame, before money, before fear followed his name, Mike was just a kid from Brownsville trying to survive. Violence surrounded him, not as entertainment, but as reality. Weakness wasn't punished, it was erased. When Cus D'Amato entered his life, he didn't promise greatness. He promised structure, rules, control. Cus understood that Mike's rage was fuel, but without direction, fuel only burns the engine. Under Cus, Mike learned that discipline wasn't restriction, it was protection. It gave him an identity stronger than fear. Success came faster than anyone expected. Knockouts piled up, opponents crumbled. Crowds watched with a mix of awe and terror. And didn't just win fights, he dominated minds. But dominance has a dangerous side. When praise replaces guidance, confidence turns into entitlement. When fear replaces respect, power stops being balanced. And when Cus died, the one voice capable of correcting Mike disappeared. The silence that followed was louder than any crowd. That's when the mistake began forming, not in one explosive moment, but in slow decisions that felt harmless at first. Skipping discipline, ignoring advice, trusting people who benefited from his chaos. Mike believed he had outgrown rules. That belief is where many legends fall. Reflectively, discipline built him, but ego convinced him he no longer needed it. The very thing that rescued him as a child was quietly being abandoned as a man. Inside, the hunger changed. It wasn't about mastery anymore. It was about proving something, proving he was still feared, still dominant, still above consequences. The world kept applauding, so the warning signs were easy to ignore. But success doesn't stop mistakes from growing. It hides them. And while Mike looked unstoppable to everyone else, something inside him was slipping. If you're finding this story hitting deeper than you expected, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Stories like this aren't about gossip. They're about understanding what really breaks people and what sometimes saves them. By the time Mike noticed the damage, it was already rooted. The mistake wasn't public yet, but it was inevitable. When discipline leaves, chaos eventually takes its place. And the fall, when it comes, never announces itself politely. Tonight, this story is only beginning because the mistake did not end his life, it tested it, and what followed would expose fear, redemption, and the cost of ignoring discipline until it is almost too late for everyone watching closely now from the very start. The fall began quietly, the way most real collapses do. There was no single night where everything exploded at once. Instead, it unfolded through moments that felt disconnected at the time. A training session skipped here, an argument ignored there, a sense that rules were optional when you were powerful enough. Mike Tyson had spent his life being told he was different, and slowly, dangerously, he started to believe that difference made him immune. Without Cus D'Amato, The structure that once guided him faded into memory. The lessons were still there, but they were no longer enforced. And discipline, when it's not reinforced, doesn't disappear loudly. It erodes. Mike began surrounding himself with people who admired the legend, not the man. People who nodded instead of challenged, who benefited from excess instead of balance. They enjoyed the chaos because it didn't hurt them. It only hurt Mike. Inside his mind, pressure kept building. Fame amplified everything. Every mistake became a headline. Every flaw became entertainment. Instead of slowing down and recalibrating, Mike reacted. Anger became his default response again, just like it was when he was a scared kid in Brownsville. Only now, that anger was backed by power, money, and global attention. That combination is dangerous. When anger is rewarded instead of corrected, it grows teeth. The mistake that nearly destroyed him wasn't just about losing control in public moments. It was about losing control of himself. He stopped listening, stopped reflecting, stopped accepting responsibility. Consequences felt unreal, like something that happened to other people. That mindset pushed him closer to the edge with every decision. And the world, hungry for spectacle, kept watching. Then reality arrived. Hard. Legal trouble, suspensions, public humiliation. The same voices that once praised him turned critical. The fear he once commanded turned into judgment. For the first time in his adult life, Mike was forced into stillness. No fights to prepare for, no crowds to perform for. Just time and silence. Silence has a way of exposing truths you can't outrun.
At first, he resisted it. He blamed everyone else, the system, the media, bad influences. And while some of that was true, it wasn't the whole truth. Deep down, Mike knew the mistake wasn't external, it was internal. He had walked away from discipline, from humility, from the foundation that once saved him from becoming exactly what he was now becoming. In that quiet period, memories of Cuss resurfaced. The warnings, the lectures, the insistence that fear must be controlled, not obeyed. Mike began to understand that his greatest enemy had never been opponents. It was his own unchecked impulses. The realization was painful because it meant admitting that the fall wasn't inevitable. It was chosen, one small decision at a time. This was the crossroads, the point where denial could harden into destruction, or accountability could open a different path. Mike didn't know it yet, but this moment of forced reflection was the beginning of what would save him. Not overnight, not easily, but slowly, honestly, and without applause. The transition, deeper introspection. The hardest part wasn't losing the titles or the respect. It was facing himself when there was nowhere left to hide. Mike Tyson had spent most of his life moving forward at full speed, training, fighting, winning, reacting. There had never been time to stop and ask why he did what he did. Now, with everything stripped away, that question sat in front of him every day. And it was uncomfortable, because the answer wasn't simple, and it wasn't flattering. Mike began to see the pattern clearly. Fear had always driven him. As a kid, fear of being weak. As a champion, fear of being ordinary. When fear was guided by discipline, it made him unstoppable. When fear ran unchecked, it made him reckless. Somewhere along the way, he had confused aggression with strength. Cuss taught him that true power was control, but Mike had drifted back to believing that intimidation alone was enough. That belief nearly ruined him. This realization didn't come with peace right away. It came with shame, regret, long nights replaying moments he wished he could erase.
But something important happened during that time. Instead of running from those feelings, Mike stayed with them. For the first time, he allowed himself to be uncomfortable without lashing out. That was new. That was growth. He started reading again, thinking again, revisiting Cus D'Amato's teachings, not as fight strategies, but as life principles. Discipline, patience, humility. Cus had warned him that success would test him more than failure ever could. Mike finally understood what that meant. Failure humbles you quickly. Success whispers lies slowly. What began to save him was responsibility. Not public apologies or image repair, but private accountability. Admitting that he had played a role in his own downfall. That talent didn't excuse behavior, that pain didn't justify harm. Those admissions were heavy, but they were also freeing, because once you accept responsibility, you regain control. Mike also began listening again, to therapists, to mentors, to people who weren't impressed by his name, people who spoke to him like a human being, not a myth. At first, that was uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being questioned, but over time, it grounded him. It reminded him that being feared was never the same as being respected.
There were setbacks. Old habits don't disappear quietly. Anger still surfaced. Ego still knocked. But now, Mike recognized the warning signs. He paused instead of reacting. He reflected instead of exploding. Those small changes didn't make headlines, but they made a difference. Slowly, the mistake that nearly destroyed him began losing its grip. This wasn't redemption yet. It was preparation. Because before the world could see a change, Mike had to live it. And the final transformation would come not from another fight, but from a deeper understanding of who he was without the armor of fear. Change didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with applause or headlines. It showed up in quiet choices, in moments where Mike Tyson did the opposite of what the old version of him would have done. He walked away instead of escalating. He listened instead of interrupting. He accepted criticism instead of seeing it as an attack. These moments seem small, almost insignificant, but together they reshaped him. Mike started to understand that discipline was not something imposed from the outside. It had to come from within. When Cus was alive, discipline was enforced. Now, discipline had to be chosen. That difference mattered. Choosing discipline meant choosing discomfort. It meant resisting impulses that once defined him. It meant admitting that strength without control was just chaos of disguise. As he reflected more, Mike realized something painful but clarifying. Boxing had given him purpose, but it had also given him an excuse to avoid dealing with his inner life. As long as he was training, fighting, and winning, he didn't have to confront his fears. Now, without that shield, he had no choice. The mistake that nearly destroyed him forced him into this confrontation, whether he was ready or not.
He began speaking openly about vulnerability, something his younger self would have laughed at. He talked about fear not as something to suppress, but something to understand. That shift didn't make him weaker, it made him steadier. People who listened closely noticed the difference. His words carried weight because they were earned, not rehearsed. He wasn't performing wisdom, he was living it. The world slowly adjusted its view of him. Not everyone forgave him, not everyone needed to. Mike learned that redemption isn't about universal approval, it's about internal alignment, about knowing that you're no longer running from yourself. That lesson was harder than any fight he'd ever trained for. What truly marked the change was how Mike responded to reminders of his past. Where shame once dominated, there was now reflection. Where anger once flared, there was restraint. He didn't erase his mistakes, he integrated them. They became reference points instead of open wounds. Proof of what happens when discipline is abandoned, and evidence of what's possible when it's reclaimed. This phase of his life wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And real change rarely looks cinematic while it's happening. It looks like consistency. It looks like effort repeated without recognition. It looks like choosing growth even when no one is watching. The mistake that once threatened to define Mike Tyson was losing its power, not because it was forgotten, but because it was understood. And that understanding set the stage for the final evolution, where the man once ruled by fear would learn what it truly means to be at peace.
The transformation wasn't immediate. Every day brought reminders of the chaos he had left behind. Headlines from years ago, old footage, former associates, even casual conversations triggered the memory of the man he had once been, the man nearly destroyed by one mistake. But instead of letting these reminders provoke anger or shame, Mike used them as lessons. Each memory became a checkpoint, a test of whether he would react as before or choose differently this time. And gradually, he chose differently, again and again. He realized that the mistake wasn't just about power or fame. It was about ignoring the inner work required to manage that power. Every fight in the ring had demanded preparation, focus, and respect for the rules. Why should life be any different? That question became central to his reflection. It reframed everything. Suddenly, the lessons Cuss had drilled into him weren't just boxing strategy. They were survival tactics for life itself. Mike also began giving back in ways he never had before. Not for show or headlines, but because he understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be unprotected, and to be overlooked. He connected with young men, teaching them about discipline and consequences. He spoke about fear and control. He didn't just tell them about his own mistakes. He showed them. That kind of honesty is rare, and it resonated deeply. Through mentoring, he began to make amends indirectly, offering the guidance he had once needed so desperately. This period of reflection also changed how Mike saw himself. He stopped identifying purely with the fighter, the champion, the unstoppable force. He started identifying with the human, the learner, the man responsible for his own path. And that shift reshaped his confidence. It was no longer the ego-driven confidence that had led him to reckless decisions. It was grounded, thoughtful, and resilient. He had finally learned that strength without control was meaningless. True strength was in measured decisions, self-awareness, and moral responsibility. Small victories reinforced the change, handling conflict without aggression, listening instead of reacting, accepting criticism and using it for growth. These victories didn't make headlines, but they mattered more than any championship belt. And with each success, Mike's self-trust grew. He had faced the mistake that could have destroyed him and had taken control instead of letting it define him. The world started noticing too. People respected the change not because it erased his past, but because it showed he could learn from it. That respect was different from fear. It was earned and sustainable. And Mike understood that this respect was now more valuable than the fear that once followed him. Because fear is temporary, but respect lasts when grounded in integrity and consistency. Now the stage was set for Mike Tyson's true comeback, not as a fighter returning to the ring, but as a man who had faced his own worst mistake and survived. The lesson he carried forward was clear. Mistakes can nearly destroy you, but they also hold the seeds of transformation. It's not the fall that matters most, it's the courage to rise with understanding, humility, and discipline. By the time Mike Tyson reached this point, he understood something most people never do, that survival isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about how you respond when they happen. The mistake that nearly destroyed him had taught him lessons no fight ever could. It had stripped him down to the core, forcing him to confront fear, ego, and the parts of himself he had ignored for too long. Discovered what real strength truly meant. He had once believed that power alone defined him, that intimidation and victory were proof of greatness. But the mistake had revealed the opposite, that without discipline, humility, and reflection,
Even the strongest can crumble. That realization shaped the man he was becoming. Mike now carried himself differently, not with fear in his wake, but with a quiet authority born from experience. People noticed. Some were inspired. Others simply respected the change. And Mike didn't need anyone to see it to know it mattered. He had regained control of the only thing that truly counted: himself. In the end, what saved Mike Tyson wasn't a dramatic event, a shocking intervention, or a headline-making comeback. It was the slow, deliberate process of accountability, the willingness to examine every choice, every consequence, every moment he could have done better. It was rebuilding his foundation piece by piece, starting from the core principles Cus D'Amato had taught him decades earlier. Power without control destroys, but power tempered with wisdom builds. That wisdom had finally returned to him. Mike's story now serves as a lesson far beyond boxing. It shows that mistakes, no matter how big, don't have to define your life. They only do if you allow them to. With humility, reflection, and consistent action, even a catastrophic misstep can become a turning point. Mike understood that his fall wasn't an end, but a beginning, and that beginning was stronger than any victory he had achieved in the ring. As you think about this story, remember, it's not the mistakes themselves that matter most. It's how you face them. Mike Tyson faced his. He confronted fear, ego, and loss. He chose accountability over denial. He chose growth over repetition. And that choice changed everything. That's what made him more than a fighter. It made him human, resilient, and finally at peace. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Mike Tyson's life, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What part of his journey resonated with you most? These stories aren't just about legends. They're about lessons we can all take into our own lives. And remember, the difference between being broken and being unstoppable isn't always talent. It's the courage to face yourself when no one else is watching. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by a mistake, think of Mike Tyson. One mistake nearly destroyed him, but his choices afterward defined the rest of his life. And in those choices, there's a lesson for everyone. It's never too late to reclaim control, rebuild your foundation, and rise stronger than before.